Yo, what up, everybody? You already know Sly K Loco here with another episode of CannaConvos with Matthew, aka Sync Angel. Now, he is an IPM specialist and he has been killing it out there for a very long time. I think you're actually getting your flowers now. Everybody's actually understanding how badass you are, right?
I appreciate it. I feel like a lot of word of mouth has been helpful. Yeah.
Good, good. Now we had one episode already recorded on Instagram, but that's when Instagram started messing with me again, and so I couldn't get your audio, and that was a great episode, man. It was a great episode in the winter waste. I was so mad about that.
It actually has been a problem for me too. So I see that you've stepped up your game a bunch, and I feel like we will have a much better situation this time.
Yes, yes. So, and now I'm like editing and everything, so it's gonna be much better. So for those who don't know, this is Matthew once again. He is the IPM specialist. He is very knowledgeable on all the pests, mildews, fungus, pathogens, anything that could basically anything that can go wrong in your tents, outdoor grows, commercial grows. You do it all, man. You're very knowledgeable. I commend you on that one. Tell you good job on that.
Well, it takes all kinds, and I think that a big part of that for me is like kind of being like a medic or a like a doctor, right? Like if something's spreading, you want to help everyone. You don't want to be like, oh, can't help them. Like in some ways, even if like a nursery, you're going to get plants going everywhere. And even in residential situations, you got crops that are like that too, where people grow like citrus, and then that gets a problem that goes somewhere else. So.
Yeah, man, it's crazy. And there, like right now, there's a lot of stuff going wrong with people's grows out there. Like we're having a lot of issues. So everybody should be able to have this knowledge that you're spreading out there. And so that's why we have you back on, huh? So my first question was we usually get into where did you come up with your name, right? And the last one time we didn't get to do that. So let's refresh that so I can see how did you come up with your name?
Yeah, well, actually, this name here is from the YouTube channel that I had, but the reason why I chose it was actually just an interest in like chemistry. I'm actually not a chemist or anything like that, but like like menthanol was like the major component or compound that people might know from like peppermint and some other mint plants. Really liked that plant in general and that family of plants, Lamiaceae. So many things. There are a lot of things that are mints that you don't even know actually in the mint family. I think for a lot of people, but they're very beneficial plants. So I just put Zen onto it because at the same time I was actually preparing for a trip to China, which I took for 2 years. So I was in the People's Republic of China for the beginning of the 2010s, and had a lot of interesting experiences there too. So that's part of the pedigree for where that name and where the logic was coming from. And then when I came back to the U.S., I had already had that channel and everything, and I was already working, kind of using that name schema. So it just stuck. And because the name is kind of unique and almost a little bit weird, I will say that I am considering a bit of a brand change in the future, but
Okay.
for the most part, it hasn't been a problem or anything like that. And now people know, I think, a unique name for a unique idea.
Yeah, yeah, and it definitely works too because there's not like many people out there with the name Sentinel or Sync Angel either. So
Yeah, that's true. So Sync Angel is the personal Instagram account, and it's like synchronize and angel, the mythical creature, right? So
yeah.
the idea of like bringing a bunch of things together, and it is a bit of a Evangelion reference too for people who are familiar with that show. So that's where
I'm
that
not.
came from. Well, that's okay. I'm sure a lot of people in your audience will probably know it if they're on
Yeah,
the internet too much.
yeah, they probably will. So my first question I wanted to get into right here is I'm dealing with powdery mildew, right? And I was looking back in your page and I saw that you were talking about it. What do you suggest doing if you do get powdery mildew? Like, should you feed your plants more? Should you get rid of the plants? What's your opinion on that?
Like in what kind of context?
Well, like I had somebody on who said that if you had even a little bit of powdery mildew, that you should get rid of the whole plant and just cut down all of it and then just restart and not even do that. And then there's some people that say that you could spray for it. And but what he was bringing up was that there is an end like residual. There's just still left over from it being in there. So should you just get rid of it or should you go with spraying?
I would say you should probably get rid of it.
Okay.
I would say that you don't have to throw any plants for powdery mildew. It's actually a common misconception. I think this might be where you're getting or where they're getting at is this pernicious myth that powdery mildew is a systemic pathogen, which means it's a pathogen that goes all up through the tissues, spreads through the tissues really aggressively, very it sort of enmeshes itself, and so it might be too difficult to get rid of it with treatment methods that are appropriate
Okay.
for cannabis. By which I mean like there's products out there that are like systemic pesticides that will go into the tissue and destroy that pathogen. But then it kind of resides in the plant for a long time. So you don't really want to be playing this guessing game with people's exposure to these
Medicine.
compounds, especially if they're going to be combusted afterwards, right? A lot of people are familiar with this, especially recently. So that's where I think that the idea comes from is that instead of poisoning people, you should just get rid of like a bud rot pathogen like botrytis or something, which we can get
Yeah.
into. But powdery mildew is not like that. And
Okay.
in a lot of cases with plants and including cannabis, the powdery mildews generally don't colonize the floral tissue anyways, although I have seen it happen before, but it's mostly a foliar pathogen. So
Okay.
it does make it a little bit easier, especially in veg. But you have to make that decision, what I would call a doctrinal decision based on your context. How big are you growing? How small are you growing? Are you at the very end of your flower and you're about to harvest and you just got one plant that's got powdery mildew? Maybe you get rid of it. So that kind of context is going to dictate a lot of the answers that someone would give to a question like that.
Okay. Okay. I could see that. So so the Arizona trip that you took, how did that go?
It went really well. I would say I got to tour a few facilities out there, um, and I got to go to the High Lounge, which was really fun.
Okay.
By Jason who owns it, next to the high maintenance or inside of, you could say, the high maintenance smoke shop
Nice.
in Tempe, Arizona. And if you were to go there, I actually have a couple of pictures. Jason probably wouldn't mind me sharing, which we could edit
Okay.
into the video. But
Nice.
it's a really cool place. It's set up kind of like it almost kind of feels like a speakeasy, like a cannabis lounge almost.
Okay. Okay.
Um, I got to try out some of the cool Japanese and other sort of foreign like chips and sodas and things like that they had there. Apparently, for people who like to game a lot, there's a video game tournament that happens all the time. There's a calendar on their website you can check out too. And I'm probably going to do a Pestapalooza there sometime in 2025, one of my seminars about pests. So
Okay, nice, man. Yeah, I was looking at your last Palooza. Like that went pretty well. You guys had gift bags to give out, and there was
yeah,
a Micro Hydro Life was there, or Microbe Life Hydro, or yeah, I don't know if I'm saying that right, but yeah, they were there. Like that looked like a really cool place, man.
yeah, it's always surprising when people to me they come over to these events. I hosted with Growcast Jordan River,
Okay.
and so we get people from the Growcast community, and we get people from my own community, and we also get people who know both of us, and sometimes we get people flying in from like Wisconsin or some other place, like when I was in New York, and we did it in San Diego, and LA. We did that last year as well. So it's cool when people like fly out just for the specific event. So in Illinois, we had a bunch of people coming in from north of Illinois, and also Missouri and other places. So it was very interesting, and each place has their own unique context they have to deal with. So in the Corn Belt, for a lot of people, it was budworms.
Oh, really? And it's spreading really bad over there.
Well, it's like the corn earworm or the cotton bollworm, the Helicoverpa, as they're called. they're caterpillars that mostly feed on the fruits or flowers of various plants, and cannabis, unfortunately, is one of them. And it's a big problem in corn, especially in South and Central America, but also in
Okay.
North America too. Um, and so the corn belts where we grow most of our corn in the U.S. and Mexico, and specifically Oaxaca, is of course where um, corn as we know it developed, maize, right?
Yeah, amazing.
And so they've moved, some of these different species that can mate as well, they can reproduce together, so they can hybridize, and you get traits from one area, like all the way in China or Africa, where they've got chemical resistances and even resistances to BT, which is
Okay.
Bacillus thuringiensis, a bacteria that people use. Um, so chemical controls, biocontrols, and even the ability to resist like 20 degrees below Celsius in the soil when they're pupa, which is how they overwinter. So for a long time, if you're above like the 40th parallel in the U.S.,
Uh-huh.
that season would destroy the overwintering adults.
Okay.
But now it might be the case that they'll be able to survive a little bit better up there. So
Nice, man.
there's things coming in the future that people got to prepare for.
That's so cool that we're just straight up crossing other plants, you know. Well, just straight up humans in general have been crossing plants and doing this genetic modifying because that's what it is. Um Throughout like civilization. So it's thousands of years we've been doing this shit, man. It's so
Oh
fascinating.
yeah. Well, and like I love that you bring that up because it's like it's an ecosystem approach that I take too, and a holistic approach, in that like you have to consider how, for example, people crossing these plants, taking them from one place, bringing them to another. There's a lot of things we found in like genetic sequencing that shows that humans 1,000+ years ago didn't know what they were doing
No,
necessarily, in that like if you select for some traits you might not be able to tell because they're not like visible,
mhm.
like resistance traits and things, or their ability to communicate with microbes and associate with them, that can go away or wither because they're put into an environment where they don't need those relationships to survive. And if we're honest, a lot of times those symbioses, they do cost something. There's no free lunches in the ecosystem, so to speak. So
Okay.
they have to devote resources, and if they don't have to do that, then you kind of get a different relationship. So I think that's very fascinating, and it's actually very relevant to pests, because if the farmer makes a plant that's really tasty and everything, but it doesn't survive the pest, then it kind of doesn't matter,
Yeah.
right? So
Then
there's
it
always
defeats
this
the
push and
purpose.
pull. Right, exactly. And in cannabis, this is a big thing too that I feel like uh, breeders often have not. I wouldn't say that they haven't had to worry about it, but it's hard to.
Haven't
It's
thought
really
about it.
hard to quantify that, you know.
Yeah, they don't need to think about it yet, at least. Huh. That's cool, man. So cool. So I was looking back in your page and I saw the 710 Farmers Cup, which is oil spelled backwards, right? Or it's oil if you spell it backwards, right?
Right, right.
So how did that go? How was the cup and who won? And
A lot of people won. There were a lot of contestants. So this is
okay.
mostly yeah, concentrates of various kinds. The event was very fun, and I'm glad you bring this up because San Diego in general. So this is the San Diego Farmers Cup. It's been around
Okay.
for a while. I've been going to it for a long time, and I always like to share it because honestly, Southern California is a place that should be much more like productive, and not that I'm saying it's not well known in California in general, but I just feel like it's so fragmented, and it's because of like you know local politicians and things becoming less and less, more and more comfortable, but very very small victories in various ways. So I was really happy to see the turnout of people this last event, especially so. And it also there were a lot of people who were contestants that were home growers, and they made
Okay.
their own hash or resin or rosin or whatever, and they contributed that, and there was various judges that voted on what they liked. There was also a joint competition too, which was cool because joints are one of my favorite ways to
Oh,
consume myself. Yeah. So
Always. Yeah. I'm me personally, I'm a joint smoker and I just stick to joints. I don't even really like oil too much because I don't like getting that high nowadays because I'm like my tolerance isn't at what I used to be. Okay. I used to be a kid. I wanted to get as blazed and as stupefied as possible, but nowadays I have things to do, you know. So I gotta stay a little bit, able to to function a little bit, you know what I mean? But
it's
more
easier for
profitable.
your dosing, right? You can like take one drag or pull, whatever.
Yeah.
Maybe you can make that longer or shorter, but yeah, I feel like for me, for concentrates like cards on the table, I compared to some people, I take a lot more than them. But for a
Oh,
lot of
really?
people, I see people putting like huge globules, like half grams or quarter gram, dabs, and I could never do that.
Oh.
I would be, yeah, stupefied is the right word. I would be maybe hospitalized is a better word,
Yeah, I
So
love
I have,
less smoke life.
you know, um, but if I'm careful about it, if I'm very precise with the dosage, they can be very great too. But I'm totally there with you. Totally there
Yeah.
with you.
Now I wanted to make a move into making my own concentrates and dabs and all that, and because I got my brother-in-law, he has a hash maker now, so he put money into making hash maker so that we can. But now we need a press, and then all the stuff that comes with it, the little bags and all the stuff like that that you need to get. But I'm thinking about doing it. I want to see if I can do a good product. Hopefully, I can come out with a good one. Are you well versed in the oils
I think I have above average versement
knowledge?
in the oils, but I'm no expert. And
Okay.
and if you want to talk about experts, here in my menagerie of things that I've contributed to, not this, except for like maybe 25 years ago, but the curious about cannabis, Jason Wilson, who is a PhD in
Right.
philosophy, actually, very
Right.
very smart guy. Um, he knows a lot about the various scientific aspects of cannabis cultivation and processing and things like that, and has a book about it, which I've contributed to partly for the pest and cultivation aspect.
Nice.
So
I'll
there's a
put a
lot of,
link up here to the book.
oh yeah, absolutely, yeah. I think a lot of people should be aware of that, and there's more of that scientific research being done. So I appreciate that.
Yeah, I really dig how I'm kind of skipping around on the questions, but since we're on that subject of how like everything's changing and the knowledge is coming out, there's books coming out and stuff like that. I saw that you um collaborated with Cornell University to make a guide, right? And is that like a grower's guide?
That's right. It's like it's a grow guide, essentially, a cultivation
Okay.
guidebook.
And that's for New York,
Um,
right?
That's correct for Cornell University in New York
New
State.
York.
Yeah, I was invited to contribute, and it was a really great experience. I have to admit, I did have to spend a lot of time burning the candle at both ends
Okay.
because they had quite a deadline. But me and various other people who also contributed, various experts and industry leaders and things like that, came together and hammered it out at a
That's
time
so
when I
cool.
think more people could use it. No, I appreciate
Yeah,
that. Thank you.
because really, it's like there's a shift happening now to where the knowledge is starting to get out there, and we're starting to try to make a baseline of knowledge to where you would be able to be like, okay, this is what's going on, right? You're having fungus gnats, okay. You have aphids, okay. You have this, that, so now instead of a bunch of bro science, but that's what it is bro science. There's a bunch of people who didn't really know what they're talking about, but know that they're on the cusp of the right thing, but like there's not a set information thing, book, guide, whatever that you guys are doing. So I just wanted to give shout out to that because it's so cool.
No, I appreciate it, and I think you're right that there's a lot of people who make do with the knowledge they had, but actually that was one of the impetuses for my own work, was working with my friends and other people who were growing cannabis and other plants as well, and they just didn't know the like deep erudite insect arcana that I happen to know
Yeah.
about, and other sorts of things too. And like you're growing up, you have this interest, and it's like who cares about bugs? Who wants to work with bugs. Like who cares about that? Well, apparently not very many people, which is great for me because that's, a specialist role now that, you know what I mean? So,
Yeah.
um, so that interest was actually very useful and instructive. And I'm glad that a lot more people are becoming more interested in talking about those
Of
topics
course.
and various other pests as well.
I feel like it's very important too because these like they're not pests because like I said before in our last interview, they were here way before us, so
Yeah, that's one way to
these
look at it.
pests, like they're not pests. We make this environment perfect for them to survive and to thrive in. So like for them to be able to for us to be able to make this perfect environment for them, of course they're going to want to come in. All these pests. So, we should learn about it.
Yeah, they're pests because they're a problem for us, but they're a lot of times an important part of the environment. Sometimes they're invasive to your region, and so I feel a little bit less bad about that. But yeah, like what do you expect when you like go to grow in the desert or California, right? Where when it's like summertime, all the other grasses and things are like dried up and whatever, and then you have big, lush green leaves and things. Like where do you think they're gonna go? Like
Yeah, man. Come on. You can't hate on them too much for that. I mean, of course, it's
yeah.
just nature. And so they were here way before us. That's why I like to tell everybody don't be so mad at the pests, guys, because they were here before us and we make a perfect environment for them. So, so I assume you're getting a lot more of the everyone. I like you're. I'm sorry. You're getting a lot more guests and everything now that everybody's growing, right? Because like you get to do because people are good in your line of work. It's not just cannabis; it's all growing. So all agriculture has to do with IPM.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Sometimes I'm even asked about like residential pests too, which is not my forte, but like as a person who lives in a place that is still something that I know a little bit about. Hate ticks. Huge non-advocate for ticks. I don't like ticks very much. So I'm always a little bit concerned going up to like the northeast of the U.S. or whatever, or the East Coast, where I know they're a lot more common, at least certain
Why is
ones.
that?
But
Like,
uh, but
why don't you
yes,
like ticks so much?
because I don't want to develop
Lyme disease.
Lyme disease. That would be
Okay,
terrible,
okay.
and especially if I get like alpha gall or whatever they call it, where you become allergic to meat. Are you familiar with this?
No, I'm not.
Yeah, so you could become allergic to red meat. So that would be unfortunate.
Is it but from bacteria that they carry?
Yeah, Borrelia
Borrelia.
bacteria cause Lyme disease. There's apparently two that they found now, but one
Okay.
in particular that people are all concerned about. So
Nice. I saw this one thing where like some mooses because the ticks weren't falling off the moose during winter and falling on the ground and dying, because everything's warming up now. That the ticks are
yes,
surviving when they're getting down on the ground, and so they just climb right back up onto the moose, and so they're literally sucking the blood out of her. And like you see some moose that are just just getting eaten alive, and it's because of the heat.
yeah, and that's a perfect example of where like because things are changing. Budworms that I was talking about earlier, yeah, that's becoming more of a problem because it's heating up in some places, so that cold resistance I was talking about is less important. But also, it's easier for things to survive multiple generations. What happens? I'll give you an example here in Central America, and also on latitude areas of like Africa and other places in Southeast Asia. The equatorial band,
Yeah.
there's no seasons, right? It's not temperate. So these budworms are like reproducing like, 11 generations out of 12 months of the year. And then they spread like 1,000+ kilometers on the jet stream up and down the continents, basically. And to give you an example, that means that something from like Oaxaca or central Mexico can move all the way up into I'm going to say the Middle East, the Midwest, where the corn earworm is, or where the corn is grown, and that kind of stuff. And they might bring traits with them that allow them to be more resistant or otherwise less incapacitated. So that's a big concern. And even things like black widows and brown widows and other spiders that maybe people don't like to have around their houses are surviving longer and for more seasons. So it's all becoming a turning point that, again, people will have to consider. That's not going to be like the past. And as cannabis has grown more and more, that's also going to be an issue, especially if you go outdoor and greenhouse and you don't have the protection of a structure.
Yeah, right. Because all those bugs love humidity and heat, so that's perfect for them. Crazy. So let's talk the HLVD cure. I saw on your post that there was somebody, or they were claiming to have a cure for $380 or higher,
Yeah. Yes.
and there wasn't even any testing or anything, right?
Yeah. Yeah. They were just like, as you saw in the post, they were like, "Hey, here's this thing for like $400. Trust us, bro. It's in trials right now, but buy it now instead." Like, it just when I ask you, like, when you see something like that, what do you think?
I automatically think scam.
Right?
I
I
think
mean,
somebody's just
it's
moving in on something that's happening out there in the community, and there's a window for revenue, so they're gonna go for it.
yeah. I mean, it's I don't I that word is very important and it's very very strong and it's an accusation. But
It is
like, and so I don't like to just levy it with no concern, but it's weird.
allegedly.
I felt pretty comfortable being like, hey, this is very concerning. You should analyze the claims being made and come to your own decision. But people are desperate. Hop
Yes.
latent viroid is a huge problem. As far as I'm aware, there's no conventional cure, by which I mean something you would like spray or apply maybe before you get it or after you get it, for you to not have it. And also, for those who don't know already, the symptoms are inconsistent, so they can be asymptomatic up until a certain point. Like when you flower, you put all your time, energy, water, nutrients, money, and then suddenly, like, it's all stunted.
Yeah.
Oops. In some ways, you'd wish that something like Fusarium had rolled in through, killed your seedlings at like week 1 or 2, and you can restart.
Right. Yeah. So that for everybody out there who don't know what hoplite viroid disease is, could you explain a little bit more on that?
Yeah, so hop latent viroid is like a virus, but viruses typically have something called a capsid or a protein shell. Human viruses have this, plant viruses have, all viruses have this basically. And what hop latent viroid and other viroids have is that they don't have this actually, but they're a small little strand of what's called RNA. You could think of RNA as like pre or post DNA,
Okay.
little strand of genetic material. The huge problem is that to the plant cells that are producing proteins and using RNA and DNA to do this, they can't tell the difference. It just looks like RNA to them. So they go, oh, that's RNA. Let me go replicate that. And so instead of expressing the genes that you're concerned about, like making the plant taller, producing metabolites we care about, like terpenes and esters and all that kind of stuff that we care about as consumers, and also just basic metabolic processes that you need to survive. Instead of doing that, they're producing more and more of this hop latent viroid. So they don't even express any genes. What they just do is be a monkey wrench in the machinery of the cells, essentially, and it produces a bunch of junk instead of producing what's supposed to produce. That's why the symptoms are so weird, and sometimes they can come across in different times, like stunting, chlorosis, which is yellowing of the leaves.
Okay.
Sometimes you get less or different aromatic profiles and things like that. It's because the plant is like not producing the genes it's supposed to, essentially, or expressing them.
Wow. Okay, that's fascinating. Fascinating. So so they were saying that it's kind of like the COVID of cannabis, right? And that it's going around, it's a pandemic and whoopity whoop, right? So I was thinking, is there any chance that a plant could fight it off, like through its lifetime? Like if you took care of the plant, you fed it, and then all of a sudden, like it was showing the signs, but now later in veg, it stopped showing the signs. Is that possible?
It seems like it. There's research to show that some people have found genes that are associated with a kind of tolerance or resistance. Now, the words tolerance, resistance, susceptibility, I think, are also something that breeders and other people will bandy about with like basically no like quantification. What I mean by this is that like there's people who are controlling certain variables. So
Mhm.
under controlled conditions, you can show like, hey, when it has this gene, it does this much better than the control that doesn't have the gene when it's getting the same amount of pathogen, the same amount of other environmental effects and things. You can't just put a plant out there and be like, oh, this year it didn't get powdery mildew. I guess it's resistant, right? That doesn't really, but people are doing that. People are doing that. So that's just something to consider. But with hop latent viroid, it's really important because the resistance qualities are going to be like physiological things you could basically never see visually before you get it. So it seems like there's some genes that are associated with a bit of like they'll still have it in their system, but they won't express the symptoms.
Okay.
So it's still a biosecurity problem for other people, but there may be ways to do that. And in hops, right, that you use to make beer, there's also resistance that's been found as well. So presumably, since hop and cannabis are the most
Cousins.
closest species together, they're sister species or
Okay.
sister genera. They do have this. There's this viability. There's this precedent already.
Nice. Okay, it's fascinating. So I have been dealing, as you know, I've been dealing with hop latent viroid. Um, and there's these two plants that I could have sworn had it. They probably still do because we were talking about, might they might be past the symptoms, but still hold the genetic or hold the viroid inside. Because this plant was looking very spindly, just was not right. It wasn't growing right. The roots weren't right. It just wasn't working. But I didn't give up on her. So I kept feeding her, keep transplanting her. I got her into where now I took and I snapped the little membrane and did a little LST to it, bent it over, right? Um, and now she started snapping back, starting to grow back to the big leaves. It's just looking healthier, growing right. You can kind of tell there's still something wrong with it. Maybe it might show up in flower, but as of right now, I think it might be past that, showing the symptoms. Hopefully, we'll see what happens with that. But I'm going to be sending a bunch of videos to you. I want to see your opinions on this.
Okay.
Nice. So let's talk grasshoppers. I saw in your post that somebody was dealing with a bunch of grasshoppers on their outdoor.
Yes, that's right. Aaron the Grower, ATG Acres.
ATG Acres. Okay. Make sure to go check them out, everybody, on Instagram. What was going on with that?
So my friend Aaron, he's been growing for I think close to 20 years now, and moved to from California to Oklahoma, like many people did. Did a lot of indoor growing as well as outdoor growing, and now in Oklahoma in Binger, I think, or Banger, Oklahoma, whatever it's called. And so like kind of close to Oklahoma City, actually, a little bit southwest. And he calls it no hope dope because when he found these like effectively Oklahoma land race. So for people who are outside the U.S., there was a time period we were growing hemp for various reasons, and we just kind of let it go, and they
Really?
escaped cultivation. Yeah, and so they're feral. They're basically feral populations of cannabis now.
Which is a land race.
Which is landrace, right? Essentially. And the story goes is that he called it no hope dope because there was no hope that it would be dope, essentially. And he decided to take a try on it. So he crossed it with some other plants, and according to him, the plants did a lot better versus grasshoppers. So maybe a bit of tolerance or resistance to them. Certainly, the populations were growing, even though there were swarming grasshoppers everywhere, and that kind of a thing. So I guess there is some circumstantial evidence to that, and so it's been working out well for him. as he's grown his farm on his property.
Nice, man. Well, shit. Congratulations to him. I was thinking about locusts for some reason.
They're the same
And
thing. Yeah, locusts, grasshoppers. Yeah, they're
yeah.
pretty much interchangeable.
So are locusts just more aggressive grasshoppers?
I think that if you want to be super technical, you might say that technically locusts are swarming grasshoppers. So not all grasshoppers swarm. Um, so of those that do, they can be in like a what's called like a solitary and a gregarious phenotype. So what happens is that the seasons change, but a big part of it is also their perception of gregarity. So if you've got a bunch of them, a bunch of individuals that for whatever reason happen to be around each other, bumping into each other, there's physiological changes combined with environmental factors as well that basically tell them, hey, this would be a great time to
Get
turn into
together.
the swarming phenotype and move in a larger group and mate and reproduce and that kind of thing.
Also, they're mating while they're eating all that food.
Oh yeah, for sure, for sure. Not
Oh,
like always at the same time, but I think it's like a I think it's because grasshoppers and their ancestors, they've been around a long time,
oh yeah.
and basically I think this is like a physiological failsafe that they've developed over like hundreds of millions of years to like be like, hey, when there's lots of food and lots of us, let's do
It's
it.
the best
And
time to
when
do it.
right, exactly. And when it's not that way, let's be cautious and let's like, do what we can. And I
Yeah, that
think that
makes
makes a
sense.
lot of sense.
That
Yeah.
makes a lot of sense. They're all together right now. We better get it off while we can, before we can't get together again. So it's
Yeah,
kind of
yeah,
like,
right. I think it makes total sense.
yeah, it's kind of like Freaknik, like back in the day. you know, just kidding. Um, do you know anything about the dispo distillates? Distillates. I don't know if I'm saying that right. The
Yeah,
distillate.
distillates. Yeah, from the
So they're
dispo.
distillates, right? I guess they're adding more terps to it to make it more sweet. Do you know anything about that? Are they doing that or no?
I think there are people doing that. There's people doing all kinds of stuff like that. Um, and people are none the wiser. That's why I think science is so important for this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And you don't have to get a PhD in chemistry to even understand some of these concepts, honestly. But I think caution is important. I think being skeptical of your sources is really paramount if you want to be a knowledgeable consumer. I think that, like for example, I was just in San Francisco,
Um,
and I was working up there, and I got to tour some dispensaries and the bud tenders and things like that. They were crackerjack teams, certainly, but like uh, these people aren't. There's like hundreds of brands. How are you going to keep up on all of them? How are you going to know all the different things that are going on? And there's also, if we're admitting, there's a perverse incentive maybe to be less informed or to not worry about certain things if no one brings it up. So I think that as a customer, as a consumer, however you want to say it, I think that you should be, looking for as little stops on the chain of commerce as possible, because there's less
yeah.
chances of errors or issues from coming about, and also just knowing some basic things like 40% THC, 40% whatever. Like think about the biomass. How much of that is going to be like leaf material, stem material? Like if it
Yeah.
says 40% or 50%, what you're saying is that 50% of the matter produced by the plant is that much. That's just kind of not likely.
Yeah, and there's a lot of different tactics that people use, and it's just a scheme to make more money, man. That's what it
Mhm.
is. Like they sweeten it up because people are gonna want sweet, and then they go too far. Like, because I got a message from somebody, they sent it over, and they were like, "Hey, ask him about, the distillates, distills, if they're adding terps to it." And like, I'm like, well, yeah, pretty much, because they're adding terps to basically everything, anything that they can, just to get that money. Now, does adding terps or anything have any adverse effects or anything like that?
Well, some of these terpenes, if you were to go too high, I don't know how much that would be. Maybe 5% plus, which would be really egregious. I don't think anyone necessarily really would want that for the most part.
Right.
But like some of these things are used as solvents. You know, that's the power of pine sol, right? You remember that commercial?
Yes, I do.
Yeah. So like that's because of like terpenes and things from these plants, like lemons and limes and things. So they have strong dissolving effects at a level that you probably wouldn't want when you're consuming or that kind of stuff. But yes, technically, that would be an example. Another example would be additives and things that happen through the process that people are not testing for. Either out of ignorance or ambivalence, whichever one. I don't know which one's worse, but that could also be that can also be a problem.
Yes, it can be, man. Shit. That's crazy. So we ran about Pestapalooza. Oh, I wanted to ask about woolly aphids.
Yeah.
I've never heard about those. I've never heard of them. Anything? Could you elaborate a little bit more? Do they leave any mildew? Um,
Yeah. So aphids in oh, what else?
and yeah, that's what I was gonna ask.
Yeah, so aphids have been around a long time. Most aphids produce honeydew. What's called honeydew? It's their sugary excrement because they basically just feed on a bunch of plant sap, and most of that, like 90% plus, is sucrose. That's the typical plant sugar
Sugar.
that plants make during photosynthesis. And so aphids and their ancestors learned a long time essentially to do that, and they have microbes in their gut that allow them to process and break down the sugars. Otherwise they would like have a problem, because most animals have to have a more balanced diet. Woolly aphids are aphids with a lot of wax. That's why they're called woolly aphids. They don't actually have wool like a mammoth or a
Yeah,
or
like
a,
a
a
sheep or
mammal. They
something.
have a bunch of wax on their body, which is made out of hydrocarbons, which is made out of probably, you could think of them as maybe a sink for all of the various sugars and carbohydrates they're producing, or that they're feeding on. And so woolly aphids are a very early group of aphids from which descended a lot of other more modern aphids that we could think of now that don't have the wax as much. So that's where they come from, and they developed. Think about it like this: they developed on conifers, like pine trees and things like that. They have existed before flowering plants, because those plants don't make flowers, so they existed way before flowering plants even existed.
And
So
they
they're
make
pretty
sap.
good at feeding on plants. Yeah,
Okay, okay. And sap's been around for millions of years. If you think about Jurassic Park, like the fucking the mosquito that gets caught in sap, you know, that's been happening
amber.
for
But yeah,
amber. Yeah,
exactly,
yes,
exactly though. Yeah.
it's the same thing.
Yeah,
Crazy.
hardened plant sap, exactly. And there were plants that didn't have vascular systems, and they didn't even have sap at a point too. If we go back for far enough, so yeah,
Plants are amazing, bro. It's just so amazing the way that they've been here way before us. They'll be way here after us. Like it's just the way that they work, the mycelium network, how they connect and they talk to each other. It's just fascinating. On our last episode, we were talking about how fungus gnats do feed off the mycelium network. Um, let's go into fungus gnats real quick, because
yeah,
that's one a lot of people deal with fungus gnats. It's one of the basic pests that come around. I hate saying pests, but we'll say pests. Um,
you can say bugs.
bugs. There you go. The bugs. They're one of the most prominent bugs out there. A lot of people deal with them. Do you have any tips for getting rid of them, or actually just can you let us know how they work? Because I feel like knowing how they work is the best way of being able to defend against them, I guess.
I agree. I agree. Sounds like somebody has listened to my videos on YouTube.
Couple times.
Um, fungus gnats. Fun fact about them: most fungus gnats are not a problem, but you won't be able to tell the difference. Only the ones that are in the larvae that are feeding on your plants, are probably what you're going to encounter. But actually, most fungus gnats are good for the environment and only eat on dead wood. So the only ones we worry about is like a fraction of a fraction of a fraction of a percent of species, like 10 or so of like
Okay.
6,000. And those ones, they have an interesting adaptation. They are able to feed on living plant tissue, which means they have to contest with an immune system that dead tissue doesn't have. And they also feed on fungi. So despite their name, and I've had people say this, they think, oh, fungus gnat, they must only feed on fungus. You must have a lot of fungus in
Yeah.
your soil, right? But that's not the case. They can feed on one or the other. They do better on both. They get a little bit of, I guess, protein and things on the one, and then they get some other stuff on the other. Part of a balanced breakfast, I guess. And
I'm sure that makes them
they
more healthy too.
yeah, right, just like us, right, having a varied diet, right?
Yeah.
So so what happens is that they feed on your roots mostly, but I have seen in propagation, and I have video, and maybe when you make the edit or something, I'm happy to have you post it or whatever. But
Send it over.
um, and I have videos on my YouTube channel that show it, where they've actually been able to climb up the stem of like really small plants, seedlings, and then feed even on the leaf tissue. So if it's really wet, which you don't want it to get this way, it shouldn't be like this. By the way, it's an extreme example, but it does happen. I have seen it happen where if you have enough fungus gnats, taking little bites out of the stem, pretty soon it's timber.
Oh no, that's crazy. That's an infestation right there.
Yeah, so it's kind of like don't let it get to even approaching this problem, but I have seen it happen to people. And what'll happen is they've never encountered that before, so they think to themselves, well, maybe I have a different bug that's killing my plants. So that's a thing to consider. But the way to defeat them generally is to break their life cycle.
Yeah.
So, like you said, the only way to do that is to know them. The flies are not a huge issue; they don't feed practically at all. But what they do is they reproduce and they start laying eggs almost immediately, and then they die. So you see these flies, and you think, "Gotta kill the flies," because maybe you deal with flies in your house, and that's an important aspect, right? But you really want to kill them as larvae and
Yes.
as pupae in the soil. And so the larvae will stay really far down in the soil or whatever other substrate that you're growing them in. And then they start to be more okay with being at the top when they're larger, because that's when they're going to pupate and then they'll become an adult. So you
Okay.
want to use like maybe a insecticidal agent that's safe to use. It's not systemic. Azadirachtin and other neem products work really well for this. Pyrethrin products work for this. Not pyrethroids, not permethrin, not systemic compounds, but pyrethrins that are safe to use. Those are really effective. And I also like to use, biocontrols. So nematodes are really useful. The
Nematodes.
Steiner Nemafeltiae SF nematodes are really useful, and you can
Now
store
what
them like
happens? What happens with the nematodes? Are they just feeding off of the larva?
yeah. So the nematodes will penetrate the body of the worm, and then they will reproduce inside of it, essentially kill it. They release a bacteria that kills it actually, and also keeps other nematodes from getting into it because they want to reproduce, and this is basically their food and their shelter. Then the body gets just full of these nematodes, bursts, and then the nematodes go out and look for other worms to infect. And then
Oh,
once
it's
all of those are
fascinating.
dead, they kind of die with them because there's no other viable host. Assuming you don't have other viable hosts in there. SF nematodes they'll also go after things like thrips, specifically when they're pupae or pre-pupae, I should say. They have like a quiescent stage where they're kind of like not moving, and it will fall to the substrate, and they can reproduce in those. If you happen to be suffering from like some caterpillars will feed or will exist in the soil, some beetle larvae like click beetles. You know what a click beetle is?
I don't.
Yeah. You ever, as a kid, you never like touched some like beetles? Some of those they'll make like a clicking movement, and they'll be like, stop touching me," and then you might, you never had that experience. I
I
had that
think so.
experience for obvious reasons, but yeah, little click beetles. The larvae are kind of shiny and like a yellowish cream color, and they'll
Okay.
often attack roots. Some species are a big pest, while others are just feeding on dead wood. Um, but that's another example. But generally speaking, those nematodes will go away. People will make the mistake that if they apply it, then they're fine forever. Same with like fungi, like Beauveria bassiana, Eiseria, Fumosoracea, some of these other fungi that you can apply that will colonize the insects in your substrate or your soil. Again, you might have to apply those maybe multiple times in a year to have the right amount um, for a long enough period of time, especially if it's right before you think you're going to have a problem.
Okay. Okay. And if you didn't do that, that the problem will just come back.
Yeah, potentially, especially if you like we said earlier, if you're not controlling your humidity, if you're also not keeping up on the hygiene. Again, if you're indoor, if you've got a room, if you only got a tent, and you don't have a lot of good drainage for your water, then this can quickly become. I would say fungus gnats are typically not a huge deal for people who are seasoned and know they have like their options on their shelf. They're not like going to panic buy something from Home Depot or whatever.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? Like you want to have, if you have everything, all your ducks in a row, all your I's dotted, then they're not really a huge issue. But if you don't, if you're just like, oh, I'm not going to get a problem, then they can be a bit of an issue,
Yeah.
especially
And
if
if
you're
you
not
don't,
looking at your plants all the time.
yeah. And if you're not dealing with it, or you just get in kind of denial and you just let them grow, then you would probably run into that crazy ass situation where it like you said it bit the stem and like kind of almost like a beaver took it out.
Yeah, that does happen. I was in a,
Crazy.
a hemp propagation area at this point, maybe 7 or 8 years ago, and they were propagating in a pretty old greenhouse that was built in like the 1970s,
Okay.
um, and they were not doing great. Let's put it that way. And they also, I mean, but this is a systemic issue. If you're
Yes.
commercial grow, you have different situation. If you're home grow, it's different. But they didn't really have enough personnel. I feel like that were like monitoring things. And as a nursery, it's your responsibility to not let people get pests. Wouldn't you say?
Yes, I would totally say, man, you have a
Yeah.
big
So
responsibility to keep it as clean as possible. And I totally see that's why if you ever try to go to a grow play or an operation, like some people want you to be washed, wear the booties, just take as much precautions as possible to not be able to spread any bugs or anything like that because they can just get on your shoe and you walk in and boom, you go in your tent, boom, you got spider bites, you got fungus gnats, you
exactly.
got whatever it is. And you cats, like it'll jump on a cat and the cat will come into your tent and boom, you'll get something. Like cleanliness is next to godliness when it comes to growing. Definitely. Um, so I was looking back at one of your clips, and you were saying about fighting time preserving genetics, and that clip was almost poetic, brother. Like the way that you put it down, and like, or the way that they were talking about it is just so smart and cool because it's true. Like I've tried to keep a genetic going for a very long time, and it didn't work as well. But then some people say that you could do it forever. So it's like I don't know, it's weird. What are your thoughts on that?
I think that like are you talking about when I was on the first smoke of the day?
I think so.
I think yeah, we were talking about that because Lance was that's a big deal with him, and off camera a bit. We did speak about it on the stream on the podcast, but also not we didn't stream it. I don't know why I said that, but regardless of that, we're streaming right now. But
Yes.
the thing is that like there's like who is going to like these places where cultivation has happened for like millennia and are like worried, are they genetically sequencing, are they worried about pathogen movement? Like that's a huge issue. And but what he was concerned with was, can you have like a strain or a cultivar or whatever for like 20 plus years? Technically, I think the answer to that is yes, potentially. But
Good.
you'll get these things called somaclonal mutations. Soma means body here, and clona like a clone or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
Basically, as think about like yourself, there's mutations that will happen in your body that are probably happening right now that are not going to be passed through your germline, through your progeny when you reproduce sexually, right? But
Yeah.
these mutations will happen in your skin, in your tissues, and the same kind of thing can happen in cannabis. Now, there's going to be things that we're concerned about that we can tell very obviously when they change. And then there's going to be things that we'll not be able to tell unless we sequence the genome of the plant, really the transcriptome, which is the basically showing the genetic expression of certain things. So if one mutation happens in the process that creates a terpene or a volatile compound that you care about, that's going to be very important for the plant when you're selling it, when you're growing it, then that's going to be a huge problem. But if it's gene number 1258, and it has a little fold mutation with one protein, and it has no effect, most mutations won't have an effect, right?
Yeah.
So what I'm trying to say is you could potentially have all these soma clonal mutations have no problem, but you just have to have one or two in the right place at the right time, and it'll be a totally different situation. So that's something to think about.
Yeah, it's very something to think about, man. Let's talk about septoria. All right, what are some reasons for getting that fungal pathogen?
It's mostly a foliar pathogen, so it's a little fungus that will, like powdery mildew, although it doesn't look like powdery mildew, you can get it on the foliage mainly, and it will spread out in like a ring shape, kind of
like a bullseye.
kind of like a bullseye, and usually there's like a halo color at the edge because the tissue is necrotic. It's brown, it's dead, and that's where it stopped, or that's where it like was. And as it's growing bigger and bigger, it is that ring essentially as it grows.
That's crazy, man. I was just thinking about how Lyme disease, when you get bit by a tick, it kind of does that same thing. You get a bullseye right there. That happened. I saw it on Scrubs one time, so don't take me. Don't take.
No, but you're right. That's exactly how it works.
Yeah, it's crazy, man. How these bullseyes show up, and it kind of gives you like, "Hey, here I am." You know, I'm here. You're screwed.
Well, I mean, it's helpful, right? That's very useful for us to tell visually. Imagine if you didn't have that, and you just one day you could take a bite of steak and go into an anaphylactic shock.
Huh, that's crazy. Oh, so it does like you go that allergic to red meat?
Actually, I'm not sure how bad it goes.
Okay,
I just spoke out of turn, but I think it can be really bad though. I think it can be pretty bad.
Oh man, that's crazy.
Perhaps especially if you don't know that you have it and you just start eating normally, you know.
Yeah, and then next thing you know, you're just throwing up and you can't hold it down, and crazy shit happens, man. Well, we are at our 57 mark. I have a few more questions that we didn't get off at our last episode. Wanted to talk about the spotted lanternfly.
Oh yeah.
Is that still going around, or do we have any? Is it under control at all, or is it still the invasive species that it is?
I'd say we don't have much of a control, and it's really problematic as a Californian because I think it's almost an inevitability. We just saw for the first time ever evidence of it at the border region of California. If it gets into the grapes, it'll be a huge agricultural catastrophe. It's not grandstanding or like alarmism to say that. Experts who know way better than I have said it. It's the reason why we've had people looking for biocontrols for like 10 plus years already, because we knew it was eventually going to get here. And it's kind of a miracle it hasn't already. And it still hasn't established yet, but that could be a huge problem in the future. Probably will be. And if that's the case, this will have trickle-down effects for people who grow other crops in California. And it could even feed on cannabis, so be concerned of that too.
Oh, man, there you go. You said the main word, cannabis.
Yeah,
now,
right.
Now everybody will be on the lookout for this fucking bug. For those who don't know, it is a fly that's about, how big would you say it is?
Yeah, it gets about this big.
And it literally has spots on it. So like
big polka dots, white and black, and a red underwing. So when it flies, you can really see.
I'll try to put a picture up there so everybody can see what it looks like too, because this is something that we all need to be on the lookout for. Because if it could jump to, like, I'm real big on not just cannabis. Like if it's gonna make destruction all around for all these crops, that's jobs, that's money.
Exactly.
The Mexican culture or the Mexican community, we do most of this agriculture work. So we need to know that this stuff is out there, and we need to keep spreading the word. I didn't even know about these until I saw it in post. And I was like, wow. Well, thanks to Sync Angel for spreading the word.
That's right.
So is it a good idea to get ladybugs in your tent?
I think
to have
it's
those
not
things.
usually appropriate.
Really?
Yeah, I mean, lady beetles, they're harvested in a way that is destructive, and they're often harvested when they're to the environment because they hibernate in groups. So and usually in like dead wood and like overturned trees. So that's important for the environment to not disturb that. Um, for that reason, but also they're usually harvested at this hibernation time. And the first thing that they do in springtime in nature is that they go to fly away, right? Because they're like, there's probably no food here. Let me go find another place. So when you collect them and then you release them, their behavioral interaction that a lot of people have noted is that they go fly away, which is not
Yeah.
great for you. Yeah. They might fly into and also with the lights that you have, they're going to be disoriented. That's not the world they lived in. We have like 30 different suns. How are you going to navigate when you do it celestially by looking at the sun and
The fake sun.
the polarized light that comes from the sky? Anyways, not great. There are other lady beetles out there that are not like red with black polka dots that feed on like white flies, or they feed on things that are not just aphids. You get specialized that do that, and those I'm a fan of, but
Okay.
you have to know how to use them appropriately. So
Okay, because I was just gonna get a bunch. Like my brother-in-law went and got like 500 of them, and he let them out in his tent, and he just said that they went all over the house, and they were just everywhere. And I was like, okay, so probably not a good idea, huh?
yeah,
But
that's just what I said, right? So I'm happy to see that corroborated. Sorry for them, but yeah, if you have any help or have any questions for that, I'm happy to help.
cool. I will be spreading the word. Um, I have been actually. I've been telling everybody if they have any questions about bugs or IPM, like just shoot you a message, and yeah, maybe we'll have you on more shows and everything like that. All right. Well, we're at our hour mark, and I wanted to wrap this up and say thank you very much for coming on, brother. You have killed it as usual. You've sending
Happy to
out.
be here.
Thank you. You have been spreading so much knowledge out there, brother, and I think that we all need to be having this knowledge in our books for just to be able to defend against them and just more knowledge. Period. It's always good to have that.
Yeah, and no one can be an expert on everything. Even myself, I'm learning things all the time because there's always new things being discovered. So I'm glad I can distill stuff down for people, but there's things that I learned from many people, including yourself and other growers. So I always like to communicate with people. I learn about what are new things coming in way before it becomes published and researched. So for that information, you can check me out at zenthanol.com for professional inquiries. You can also check me out on my YouTube channel, Zenthanol, where I post most of my informative information. And you can also check me out on Discord. And join my Patreon on my Discord channel for $1 a month. As little as that, you can meet with a bunch of people, ask me questions. I'm always happy to answer questions, though. Regardless, it's just hard to go through all the social media. So if you want to be sure to have your question answered by me or over 100 people who are on my channel who are also interested in this stuff, please drop me a line there. It's a lot easier that way. And yeah, I look forward to our mutual success.
Beautiful, sir. Beautiful. You killed it. And thank you so much. We'll have you on CannaConvos once again. Or I mean, down the road, we'll book you for another episode, huh?
Absolutely. There's more
All right.
information to be told.
There's so much information out there. It's insane. I didn't even get through there's way more questions that I want to ask you about other bugs and all this, but we'll do that. We'll wait for that for part 3. All right. So thank you once again, brother. We will see you guys next time. For everybody out there, make sure to tap in next time for the next episode of CannaConvos. Late.